everyone, and welcome again to the musical Innertube. I, of course, am Don Rooney.
And I am John Timpane, and our guest today is Art Caplan, who is the Doctors William F. and Virginia Conley Mitty Professor of Bioethics at New York University's Langone Medical Center and the founding director of the Division of Medical Ethics. And Art has done so many things in medical ethics and in ethical considerations revolving around things like the uses of cadavers, the uses of genetic material, vaccine ethics, which is where he and I first met when we were together on the panel of vaccine ethics for what was the Penn Center of Bioethics, I think.
At the Franklin Institute, I believe.
That's right. That's right. And we had a very eye-opening time there, I think, when we, especially when we threw the meetings open to the public and found out a lot of things about people who didn't like vaccines. So vaccines will be part of what we talk about today, Art. First of all, have you ever in your life lived in a time when the ethics of medical applications of various sorts have been more in the news? I doubt it.
I have not. No. I thought something similar maybe was Ebola and worries about that, but this worldwide pandemic has just dwarfed what was going on with Ebola. Ebola was a little bit of an appetizer to what's turned out to be a bioethical dinner, I'm afraid.
Well, I think when we're talking not only about the pandemic that's here, but also the vaccine that's supposed to be coming. It's almost like people are getting their guns loaded even before it arrives, because I think that vaccine, which is not here yet, and its promise or its promises are as much in the news as anything else. So I thought I put that to the side for him because I thought we'd be very practical to start off with. My question for you is, suppose I wanted to go out. Let's talk about things I could do safely. For example, if I'm walking with other people, let's say my son wants to come up, he lives in a town 20 miles away. We'll all go out with masks, right? But talk to me about responsible behavior. What would constitute responsible behavior in your view?
So I think going for a walk is responsible in itself. It helps get some mental health going for you, and that's useful in this day and age. I know I'm in a big house in Ridgefield, Connecticut, where I live, but even I start to get house crazy in here after a time, and I'm fortunate, I'm in a big place. I think if your son is visiting, I'd like to know, have they been quarantined? Have they been tested recently? So before we start marching around anywhere with anybody, let's try to assess their status as best we can. If they had any symptoms recently, fevers or aches and pains or chills or or shortness of breath, things that might be concerning. If not, then I think it's great to take a walk, and I would go out with my masks, and I would take my masks off if I couldn't see anybody. I don't think you need to worry outdoors, just wandering on a trail or in the neighborhood. If I saw someone approaching, I'd put my mask back on, even though it's really unlikely in an outdoor space, particularly if you've got a wind going, that you're going to get infection from a passerby. It just is very unlikely. But just to be prudent, what does it take? 20 seconds of wearing the masks and then off again. But I do recommend the walk, and I think the exercise is good. We're not getting as much of that either these days because we're, locked in. And
you're telling me.
If I sit anymore in this chair, I'll never be able to stand up. I'll be at feet into it or something. So yes, I would say that's responsible. Now, if you said, hey, while we're out on a walk, we're passing by a stand that's selling a drink or something, and it has chairs. So I would look for social distancing. I would send only one person up to get an order. I would try not to be waited on if I could avoid that. Sometimes you can't, but if it could, let them
So you would do something like seeing if you could do it on your phone and having them put the servings out or something like this.
Be ready. Or one of my party might go up, but not all four of us, tell that person what you want, let them bring it back. Don't bring the waitress or the waiter over. You don't need to expose them. They don't need to expose you. But I would be perfectly fine sitting out there, They say 6 feet. I'd take more if I could get it, but it's fine to sit out there and do that and take your masks off and have a little bit of an enjoyable time. What I would not be doing yet still is going indoors. I know some states have allowed it. I know some states say 25% occupancy. I don't know. It still makes me nervous unless, here's my unless, if it's really well ventilated, if it's an indoor space that's open. What I'm looking for here is just something that just knocks particles out of the air, like the wind, like an air conditioner, like something that's getting air circulating. I don't like stagnant air. That makes me nervous.
So you would feel better about a very well ventilated space. I don't know if you remember Radicchio's in where they basically, it's an old fashioned Italian restaurant in Philly for those of you who've never been there, and they open one wall that's basically windows, and they can do that.
We have a big diner near us here called Oleg's, and they're out in a tent. All sides right now are open. I'm not too worried about eating under that tent, and I might not be too worried if I knew I was going to I'll give another example. In New York State, there's a new Wegmans not far from where I'm sitting. They put in an absolutely great ventilation system because they just built the store. It's right. Literally open a month. It's not the same as trying to eat in, Keen's Steakhouse in Times Square, which is underground. And God, I had a breath of fresh air down there in 200 years. I'd probably trust the Wegmans if I was really just trying to break my pattern because it's new and I'm sure the ventilation is good.
Can I ask you a question about places like a Wegmans? I mean, my Wegmans gets pretty crowded.
Yeah.
But if I wear a mask and gloves, am I doing okay in a situation like that?
Yes, and I would also come in and take some wipes and wipe down my cart before I started shopping. But yeah, I think you're okay. It doesn't hurt when you come out of there. We think wash our hands, but I might wash my face because stuff is still flying around. You touch your face, so I would do. I don't know if you go in the shower, but if you were really crazy, you could. But it's just trying to get any exposed areas clean because things can kind of linger. I was in Wegmans yesterday. I did not take a shower, but I did wash up my hands and my arms and my face.
Let me ask you a wider question about this, Art, and that is, do you take the ethical choice of getting the economy up and running and acknowledging that you will be sacrificing some people to coronavirus, or do you lock everything down, kill the economy, or hurt it very badly, but keep people alive? Is that something that we should be wrestling with at this point?
It is, although I think we know what the answer is. We're not going to lock down again completely. People aren't going to do it. I mean, forget about whether it's a good idea, a bad idea, an epidemiologically sound idea. They're not going to do it. Vast swaths of the country are saying, we won't do that. We're not staying away from work, or we're not staying out of our barber shop, or whatever the heck it is they want to go to. So I think the question really is, Don, must we mask? Should we be prudent? Can we engage in distancing as we try to go back to some of these activities? And I think we should. I think we should minimize the number of people that get sick or infected or even die. But I don't believe I keep reading these editorials that say, look, we can get rid of this thing if we could just shut down for 2 more months completely. We could really squelch this. And I think that was possible in March if we'd had the leadership to do it. I don't think it's possible now.
I know John had passed over the vaccine earlier, but now that that's coming up, I had read a CNN article, I think, where you were quoted as saying that you would like some sort of independent verification of the vaccine before it finally goes out. Somebody other than the FDA to look it over and make sure everything was okay. Did I get that correctly?
You did. So I'm not looking for a vaccine before the end of the year. I know you hear that. I'll explain why if you're interested, but let's put that on hold. The normal process is you run a study, and at some point, the FDA looks at the data and says, this data is good enough to approve this vaccine. Normally, for vaccines, those are studies that take 30,000 subjects. They're relatively big, and I say relatively because for vaccines, you got to vaccinate hundreds of millions of people, so 30,000 doesn't sound that big. But In any event, they sometimes are in a situation where the data starts to trend strongly positive before you finish. They give it to 10,000 people, and lo and behold, it looks like you're getting protection and they're not seeing any safety issue. An early approval, however, in the current political climate of the United States and some other countries too, Brazil, people don't trust the agencies because they look like they're being pressured with convalescent plasma, the blood transfusion idea, with hydroxychloroquine, President Trump's favorite cure-all way back in the day, the anti-malaria drug. It looks like the agencies got pressure to approve stuff. So my attitude is I still want the FDA to say yes or no, but particularly for an early approval, I would like to see an independent commission formed, not full of scientists, but full of trustworthy people, say religious leaders or business leaders or labor leaders. I don't really care who it is, just enough folks that people would say, yeah, okay, you persuaded them the data was good enough too, then we'll follow it. I worry right now, to be honest, if the FDA said tomorrow, this vaccine's looking good enough, we're going to declare an early approval, a lot of people just wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't take it. They don't trust them anymore. And that's terrible to say. They were the gold standard, the FDA, for decades, but I don't know anymore.
That's a terrible thing to hear. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, the FDA used to be a very authoritative source of information.
Just to take the example of the plasma, they made an announcement that it was ready to go as a treatment and said things like it could save 35% of people who are dying. The study data that they had actually showed a 3% increase in survival if you got the plasma within 3 days of hospitalization, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny group. They misrepresented the number. The FDA commissioner said he misspoke. I know the FDA commissioner. John may even remember this. He was at Penn when I was at Penn in Philadelphia. He was the head of radiation oncology. He's smart. He doesn't make statistical mistakes like that unless somebody's been pressuring him and whining at him to get out some good news. They announced it on the eve of the Republican convention. I don't know. You can make your own conclusions about the time to announce a miracle. And it really undermined the FDA. And so that's what's happened. You've seen these instances where the White House or somebody wants something done and the CDC and the FDA sort of pull away. Remember, even the head of the CDC task force, Birx, did not condemn right away the president's claim that bleach was good to treat COVID. And you're sort of like, oh, geez.
Who would be on this oversight panel?
So I would put on people literally like John Tim Payne, somebody who's got a
I know him. I could probably get in touch with him.
Yep. He's very hard to reach and normally holed up doing important things. I don't know. But let's say a guy, people who've written editorials or done media work, maybe a labor leader, maybe the head of a nursing union, maybe the head of the Chamber of Commerce, maybe. In other words, I'm looking for sectors that are impacted by the virus or good communicators or people who've kind of tried to write trustworthy editorials and stories. They don't have to be, I can be bipartisan. I'm not arguing for any sort of a politicized body, but I just want people who are smart enough to understand the data and trustworthy enough so that if somebody says, well, they said it's ready too, then we wouldn't see an anti-vaccine backlash. So it's a hard call about exactly who, but those sorts of folks.
That CNN article that I read suggested Oprah.
Yeah, could be. I mean, I hate to say a panel made up of Paris Hilton and a couple of the Kardashians and Oprah, but they may be our most influential, trustworthy thinkers. I don't know.
That's such an interesting idea, Art, because what you're not suggesting is that it be all professionalized.
Correct.
And I think that's in the current partisanized atmosphere of our debate. That's probably an excellent idea.
You know, I'm not even shocking to my peers. I'm not even suggesting a doctor or a public health person or a scientist. That's who the FDA listens to, and they'll get their say. We need more. That's why I'm trying to get us out into the community a little bit of the average citizen or the leading lights that people turn to. It would be fun to try and make the list and nominate candidates, but something.
Well, if I can't make it, I know a guy by the name of Don Rooney who I could bring in, and he has the creds also. So let us know, by the way, if someone asks you who should be on. We'd serve with if not distinction, at least enthusiasm.
I even thought a couple of former presidents or some former Politico types. I don't know.
I have my quarter ready, so I'm all set to
ready to go.
And let me talk to you about that then. Again, another further step in selling it to the public, if you will, in advertising terms. Who do you see could be the chairman of this that could actually sit down and say, we've looked at it, we agree with it, and people would agree with that chairman?
Yeah, here's how I think even about that. I think like maybe a George Bush type person, former president type, but not some kind of highly politicized at this point individual.
Firebrand, right?
Yeah. And you could go with I live with people who are like heads of big church organizations, mainstream churches that people might give some credence to and say, he's the head of the Methodists or that's the head of the bishops. Remember, there shouldn't be any big abortion issues or right to life. This is just a straight up, is the science good? And are you convinced that there's no hanky-panky here? And, normally people might say, what do I care what the Mormons think? But I might, whoever, somebody from a church could or synagogue or whatever could easily take on that role, I think.
Art, I noticed too that they're having trouble enrolling enough minority participants in the phase 3 trials of the vaccines that are on the fast track. And I know that this is a very familiar, issue for anybody who watches, double-blind trials, multi-center trials, very large trials. I mean, to me, that's also sort of a red flag. I mean, you do want, aren't those the very people, you need diversity in the group that the vaccines are administered to. And also, I think it's if you don't have diversity, then the underrepresented groups will continue to have the suspicions about supposedly white-driven medicine that, are very prevalent.
Yeah. Well, look, we do need better recruitment. Historically, we've always failed at getting minorities into almost every study that there is. Maybe had some success with sickle cell, which adversely affects a minority group. But outside of that, enrollments are poor. They're poor for a couple of reasons. One is a lot of people who are poor don't have great access to healthcare. So our healthcare system penalizes those people again because literally their disease or reaching out to them may be very difficult because they don't have primary care people, and that's
right.
Sort of where you look. Another reason is, as you mentioned, historical distrust. There have been lots of instances where minorities, not just African Americans, but others have been exploited by the system. You can think even the impact of Oprah Winfrey's discussions of the Helen Lacks, the woman whose cells were taken without compensation. The Black community is aware because of her influence of that kind of exploitation in the past. So they don't necessarily trust. But I do want to add a cautionary note here. There was a study done a long time ago, Tuskegee, and that was a study in which having a cure for syphilis was withheld from African American men because basically they wanted to finish the study and they didn't treat them. But it was also withheld because they thought African American men didn't have the same quote unquote kind of syphilis that white people did. So there was racism about the disease. We don't want to have racism about COVID. We don't need diversity in vaccine studies because blacks have different COVID diseases than whites. And I always get nervous when I hear sometimes we got to get more blacks or Hispanics or Native Americans in there. It's not because they're biologically different. It's because of the trust issue that we were just talking about. If they're not seen in the studies, then they may not show up for the vaccinations because they say, oh, well, you didn't test it on me, so I don't know if it's going to work. But it isn't biology. Ironically, the Tuskegee study that frightened some African Americans was done on racism because they said your disease is different. I don't want that perpetrated into COVID kinds of things. One last thing about recruitment. If you're going to recruit and you're doing it partly because blacks, for example, have had more disease, probably because of the lousy healthcare and maybe even bad ventilation and housing and things like that, then you have to recruit socioeconomically disadvantaged black people. You can't just recruit wealthy black people in the Atlanta suburbs. So it's even worse, if you will. If you want to really say we got the representative population, you've got to recruit broadly in these diverse communities.
Socioeconomic levels.
Yeah. And I don't see that happening much. Even when somebody says, oh, our enrollment is 7% African Americans, it's usually Howard University students or something. It's like, oh. So that's a challenge.
Let's talk also about, you were talking earlier about what to do to be socially aware if you're out walking around or visiting a restaurant. But let's talk about these super spreader events where they have a family wedding and people walk away from that wedding and over a number of states, 130 people get infected.
Yeah.
How do we handle those sort of intimate gatherings in order to make sure that it doesn't spread?
Well, the authorities are reluctant to do it, but I would show up, send that cop car over and say, you got to get your masks on, folks. I know it's a wedding or a funeral for that matter. Another event that's been disturbed by COVID badly. I think you got a mask. It's just the responsible thing to do. I don't think you're going to see people socially distanced the way I would like. I like outdoor events more than I like them in the the American Legion Hall or the VFW event. I like staying outdoors whenever you can do it. But you got to wear the mask. You just do. And when they don't, you're right, Don. We've seen a couple of super spreader things, and I wish our leaders would put on their masks, right? They keep running to rallies, and Trump, who's tested every day, and people are kept away from him, but that's not your experience or my experience. So he's got to put the mask on those public events, and so do his handlers, his friends. When I see them sitting around at a rally and or a White House press conference, and his people are out on the lawn and nobody's got a mask and they're sitting next to one another, it's a horrible, role model. It's just bad.
It's funny because I guess we don't live in a country where the state feels comfortable, at least, in imposing this kind of behavior, even though the behavior is, patently, obviously, the best kind, the most responsible kind. You have the emotional aspect of things where you're at a funeral or a wedding and it's huggy kissy, it's people want to be there for each other. They want to hug, they want to be close, and they need others to be close.
My own mom died of COVID back in April.
Oh God, I didn't know that.
Yeah, nursing home death up in Boston area, one of these big nursing home outbreaks. She was 96, but active and so forth. At her funeral, we had to stay 6 feet apart. We all wore masks. It was restricted to maybe 6 or 7 mourners. We did not go anywhere after the funeral because, where are we going to go? Indoors. And so it wasn't miserable. We quickly said some words, and then we had to get out of there because sadly there were so many deaths. The funerals were coming one after another. So that's a personal anecdote about how miserable that can be. We didn't hug. We didn't take our masks off. We were like, it was a funeral on Mars. I sometimes say, sort of an alien environment. I think what's happened is, one, we're a country that doesn't like the government telling us what to do. I'm laughing at that because Wegmans or Stop and Shop or Winn-Dixie has a better chance of enforcing a mask policy than your state, right? I mean, they say, you can't come in here without a mask. And I better put the mask on. Right. And then the governor says, put a mask on at the wedding. He's like, no, I'm not doing that. That's crazy. I won't do it. So I keep seeing businesses. It's back to the no shirt, no shoes, no service. Okay, then I have to wear a mask to go in. Okay. And then the other thing is, I'm sad to report, I think we're a little selfish. We think of wearing masks to protect ourselves. Most of the mask wearing is to protect others. So it's neighborly. But we don't think that way. We're thinking, I don't want to do it. I'll take my risk. I don't care.
Well, if I die, I die.
Yeah.
And, how does that doesn't help you, and that doesn't help anybody around you. When you encounter somebody like that, and that's the other thing, if you're working at a Wegmans or a Winn-Dixie or something, and somebody's there shopping without the mask, we've had all sorts of incidents where people try to tell somebody wear a mask and get beat up or at least yelled at. How do you handle something like that when you're in a position where somebody isn't wearing a mask and should be?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. It's an ethics question, so it fits into my, batting zone. I think the better strategy is I talk to people, listen to responses, talk to a few psychology, social science types is don't be confrontational. More ask for help. Say, you could protect me. I'm at risk. I'm older or whatever it is. I think you could help me if you would just wear your mask. You're looking to appeal to their better nature with a carrot more than you are sort of, hey, jerk, stick your mask on. So I think that's the better route is the protect my kid, protect my grandmom, she's in the store somewhere. I'm not above lying about that, by the way. But try to
come ready with a story.
Exactly. So you're looking for an appeal, and I think people respond to that better. I'm not saying they all will, but I think that's a better shot. By the way, I also think I meant it when I said the stores and the businesses are getting tougher. You're not hearing as many incidents in these, places because the stores are enforcing. And in capitalist market society America, if my boss or the business says I can't do something, we're more inclined to follow. That's pretty nuts, but there we are.
So I know we only have a few minutes left, Art, but I have to ask this question. I know it's such a big question, but I know it's something that you've meditated on. What should the schools be doing?
So I think different policies for different places. I don't think it's a uniform answer. If I'm at Middlebury College in Vermont, or I'm running Denison in Ohio, or Lewis and Clark in Oregon, and I mention these places, they're small schools, a lot of space. You can ramble around. You could probably have classes outdoors in some of these places for a while. I think they can reopen with good policies and basically, telling the students you're going to get bounced if you don't follow sensible guidance in your personal lives, and they're not as big a place that you can't monitor them. If I'm running Ohio State or SUNY Oneonta or some of these large enrollment places where there's frat houses and, cram dorms and classroom size is 3,000. I just don't see it. I don't think they're going to be able to do it in the same way. If it's high school, depends on the school. So at Flint, Michigan, last time I looked, they didn't have running water. Forget ventilation. That may not be your fastest reopening. I try to get computers, I think, there and do what I could offline. If I'm running, I don't know, Choate and some of these fancy private schools, I bet you could reopen. I bet you could do it.
Right, Lawrenceville or one of those places.
You can see what's going on, and they're going to be protected. It's not fair, but I think you could probably do it better. It's for the life of me, I can't imagine what's going to happen in the second grade, unless you get the classroom size down to something small.
Sure.
So some yes, some no. Old building, squished together, probably not. People who can follow instruction, open spaces, more ability to get classroom size under control. Yeah, probably. And so I think parents are going to have to think this through based on the conditions that their kids are going back to.
I saw something on Facebook where it was a picture of a kid and the mom was kneeling in front of him. And the dialogue that they'd written underneath was, "Jimmy, this wasn't the mask you went to school with." And Jimmy says, "Yeah, Billy had a really cool mask, so we swapped." I think the whole idea there is to say, second and third grade kids aren't always the best to follow orders. What do we do there?
I do have one other thing to say on this, which bothers me. I'm a little disturbed that we haven't set up more daycare, because the kids don't really need school. They can miss, a semester of second grade, and okay, they're delayed, but they can do it again later, hopefully. But what's happening is their parents can't go to work, and so they're looking to school as a place to put the kid. If we had better daycare, if we had more places, I keep thinking, can't we open up like unused sports arenas with many spaces and have some daycare there? Just if what we need is babysitting, then I don't like it getting dressed up as they have to go to school. Maybe they don't want to miss time. I get it as a junior in high school. Yeah, okay, I understand that. But I don't know, first grade? A lot of people take a year off from first grade anyway, and delay.
That brings up an overriding point that many people have made about the pandemic, is that it has exposed the weaknesses of our social service system. Where it doesn't function, where it doesn't go, who it doesn't serve. And the working, well, I don't want to say working poor, but people who work and just barely make it, for them, daycare is a huge challenge. And we don't have support for that.
Right.
But I mean, it's hardly less difficult for people in what we might call the middle class. They're squeezed too. So I think you make a great point. I mean, this is yet another piece of evidence that pandemics challenge societies at the things they do the least well.
Absolutely right. I absolutely agree with that. I think we're finding out that daycare is bad. Nobody replaced the ventilation in the hospital for 60 years. Why was that? Since it clearly is important as part of public health. It may not be as jazzy as getting new gene therapy, but it's pretty important. And you see all these, even for the elderly, the nursing homes got ravaged. Why? Well, they're staffed by underpaid people who aren't trained very well. They didn't have protective gear. They don't know what to do with an outbreak. They never got trained and so forth. And as far as I know, every nursing home has almost no private rooms. Why is that? It's economics. If you had more private rooms, you wouldn't spread the disease around as much. So you're seeing, as you said, John, flaws or tears in the infrastructure, the social fabric that the pandemic really reveals. And that's really irritating, frustrating.
As a way to wrap this up, let's take an overview of sort of how did we get here. We have a whole section of, I know a lot of it is political and don't tread on me and that kind of thing, but we have a whole section of people who don't think science is valid anymore, a whole section of people who don't really trust the government. I know that this country is, like I said, don't tread on me and that kind of thing, but it seems very extreme. How did we get in this situation where we can't seem to dig ourselves out of a pandemic because we don't care about each other, or that's what it looks like?
Yeah. Well, I think, there are a couple of underlying problems that many of us thought had gone away. Racism is one of them, and it's bubbled up in a vicious manner. There is absolutely divisions in our society due to immigration, due to changing, demographics. I think a lot of the majority culture, the white culture, is nervous that things are changing, and that leads to worries independent of viruses. But we're seeing that, and that's part of the reason we got here. I also think part of the reason we got here is we underfunded public health. Or I'll just beat up on my world of medicine. We love curing people. That's great. And, we spent a lot of money on genetics and trying to figure out genetic causes of disease. And it's not that they don't exist, but we spent nothing on public health. And an area that we spent absolutely nothing on too is, how do you change people's minds if they don't want to do something? Get vaccinated, for example. We have spent nothing on the psychosocial, behavioral side of healthcare. Nothing. I mean, just trust me on this. Nothing. We're good if you can inject it through a needle or take it in a pill, but we're lousy if it's behavior change or public health efforts. So I think part of the way we got where we are too is way too oriented toward therapy, not oriented toward prevention. And by the way, prevention includes housing and better food and exercise, as well as, trying to convince you to follow medical advice or something like that. So way, way bad on that side.
Art Caplan, thank you so much. This has been so eye-opening and so much good sense per second. I don't know that our poor little podcast can stand it, but we really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Yeah, Art, thanks very much for being here. And John and I are ready, willing, and able to be on that panel.
Very good.
All the best, Art. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can send us an email. It's musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com. We're also on Twitter, @JTimpain and @DonRooney9. We're also on Facebook, Apple iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, iHeart Podcasts. Feel free to like us and give us a good review on any of those platforms. Our webpage is Musical Innertube. That's musical spelled with 2 A's, Musicaal Innertube, all one word, .libsyn, spelled LIBSYN.com. And thanks, as always, to the virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us our theme music.